I'm Ed Watson. Join me for night final right after the National on CBC, British Columbia.
Monday, October 27th. Tonight, on the National, who's got a ticket? A lot of seats at Calgary's Olympics are already spoken for. Death on a picket line. A Quebec union says the police killed a striker. And on the Journal, Fleet Street has a heyday. Saxon Sin rocked Margaret Thatcher's party once again. And Memories, a tribute to what's become a Canadian institution, Canada Savings Bonds. The National with Knowlton Nash.
Good evening. Thousands of Canadians are going to be disappointed at the seats they get, or don't get, for the 1988 Winter Olympics in Calgary. The organizing committee announced today half the seats for the major events won't be available to the general public. Instead, they'll go to corporate sponsors and the media. Deborah Lamb reports.
The demand for Olympic tickets has been overwhelming. 45,000 people mailed in application forms the first day, September 30th. But even that won't guarantee them choice seats. Today, Olympic officials revealed that up to 50% of tickets for popular events like figure skating and hockey will go to something called the Olympic family.
The Olympic family, which includes all sponsors, broadcasters, and media, will be limited to no more than 50% of the house for any given event.
When it's averaged over all events, 1 in 4 tickets will go to the Olympic family. That's an unusually high figure. At the Los Angeles Games, the ratio was only 1 in 10 tickets. Today, Olympic officials had a very simple explanation.
We have a bigger family.
Calgary Mayor Ralph Klein is very concerned with where the tickets are going.
It is not the kind of thing that is conducive to games that supposedly belong to the people.
Sounds pretty crummy.
If that's the policy and we're wiped out totally, naturally we won't be too happy.
The Olympic ticketing practices have been troubled already by a police investigation involving this man, Olympic ticket manager Jim McGregor. 8,000 American ticket orders were sent to a company he owned without the knowledge of Olympic officials. The thousands of Canadians who ordered Olympic tickets will find out the first week of December if they got what they wanted. But now it seems certain many will be disappointed. Deborah Lamb, CBC News, Calgary.
This was deadline day for Billy Joe McLean. He's a Nova Scotia MLA caught fixing his expense account. Premier John Buchanan had demanded McLean give up his seat by today or be forced out. Today, Buchanan got his answer. The defiant McLean announced he'd rather fight than quit. So the job of removing him from office now falls to the legislature. Kevin Evans reports.
No one expected it would go this far.
I am not prepared, as office state, to tender my resignation.
What has become a major embarrassment for Nova Scotia's Conservative government began earlier this month. Billy Joe McLean admitted in court he had used forged receipts to obtain nearly $22,000 in government expense money. The former cabinet minister was fined $6,000. Most expected he would resign his seat, and that would be the end of it. But McLean vowed to stay on. 5 days later, he got a call from Premier John Buchanan, a lifelong friend and godfather of one of his children. The Premier later told reporters McLean had reconsidered.
And the member for Inverness South will be tendering his resignation to the Speaker of the Legislature probably later this afternoon or on Monday.
But 2 weeks later, with no resignation from his old friend, the Premier was forced to meet reporters again.
I call upon him now, by this public statement, to resign immediately.
But McLean wouldn't budge. He claimed Buchanan had reneged on a promise to let McLean be the Conservative candidate in the by-election to fill his seat. On Friday, McLean's own caucus disowned him, and the Premier issued an ultimatum.
If Mr. McLean does not resign by the first of the week, I will call the House to appropriately deal with the matter.
Today, the Premier made good on his promise. Avoiding reporters, he issued a 3-line written statement that the legislature would be recalled on Thursday to pass a law that would force McLean out. Billy Joe McLean says he intends to stay on until the matter of just how much he owes the government for his expense accounts is cleared up. But there's more to it than that.
Everybody has their dignity, and I'd like to preserve some of mine. And one of the ways to preserve it is to prove to the public of Nova Scotia that I do not owe money to the provincial government.
But with all three political parties supporting McLean's ouster, it appears that as of Thursday, any points McLean wants to make with the public will be as a private citizen. Kevin Evans, CBC News, Halifax.
The troubled refinery at Cumberchance, Newfoundland is finally going back into operation after a decade in mothballs. Petro-Canada has sold it to an American company for $1 on the condition that millions more are pumped into its upgrading. Catherine Wright reports on this latest and perhaps final chapter in the refinery's long struggle for survival.
We can turn around our unfortunate history.
It had the appearance of a historic event. Even the Premier's parents were in the audience to hear their son announce that the Cumberchance oil refinery will open again, and at no new cost to the government.
This deal involves no handouts, no giveaways, just a solid business arrangement.
When it shut down 10 years ago, the Cumberchance oil refinery was the largest bankruptcy in Canadian history. Its recent owner, Petro-Canada, said it would cost far too much money to reopen it and wanted to sell it for scrap. An Israeli firm wanted to operate it, but only if there were huge amounts of government funds. But then a new Bermuda-based firm called Newfoundland Energy said it would raise $20 million private dollars, modernize Cumberchance, and then sell crude oil products to one of the largest gasoline retailers in the United States. And that clinched the deal.
We think we can get the job done, and I'm glad to be a small part of the community.
Petro-Canada says it's still negotiating with Newfoundland Energy, but Petro-Canada's boss, the federal government, says the deal is done, that Cumberchance will be sold for $1.
Now, the argument now is whether this should be a Canadian dollar or a U.S. dollar.
For the people living in the Cumberchance area, it will eventually mean up to 200 much-needed jobs, and they're delighted.
It's really good news for Cumberchance area because we haven't had anything here for a long time.
Good news, great news.
Newfoundland Energy has already raised much of the money it needs to modernize Cumberchance. It's already signed contracts to purchase Nigerian crude. It says the refinery is perfectly located to service the northeastern United States, and it plans to have Cumberchance back in business next year. Catherine Wright, CBC News, St. John's.
There seems little doubt now that it's soon going to cost more to mail a letter in Canada. The Canadian Press News Agency has obtained a confidential Canada Post memo that outlines a plan to convince Canadians the increase is justified. Information will go out to all members of Parliament and to the media. The memo doesn't say how much the rates will go up, but it is expected first-class Canadian letters will have to carry 36-cent postage instead of 34. The memo says the increase will be announced by the Postmaster General on Friday, and it would go into effect in January. It could become one of the costliest fires ever in Canada. A downtown office building in Montreal burned overnight. The damage is at least $5 million. And as Keith Bogue reports, the building might never be used again.
The fire started on the 9th floor, but soon spread right to the top of the Electus Neon building, 15 stories up. Too high for firemen to reach with their ladders, so high it was difficult to keep up the water pressure. At its peak, there were about 230 firefighters battling the flames. Several times they thought they had it under control, only to see it flare up again. Police feared the building might collapse.
We might have a problem with the side of the building collapsing on St. Catherine Street. We don't know yet. If the fire continues, there is a danger for that.
That didn't happen, but the fire burned all night long. It took 12 hours to douse the flames. Some firemen complained there were no sprinklers beyond the 5th floor in the building. They say that would have made a difference.
As a fireman, I know it's probably the best protection you can put in a building. But we can force them to install them.
There's smoke coming out there.
This morning, the building was still smoldering. Firemen were still at work. Air Canada, Bell Canada, and Petro-Canada were among the companies whose offices went up in smoke. Their employees got the day off. Some hung around for the cleanup and watched as debris rained down on the pavement, damaging some cars. Tomorrow, engineers will try to determine whether the building can be saved or should be torn down. Inside, the cleanup had already begun in the building's shopping concourse. The fire didn't reach here, but there was plenty of water damage. The owners of the building met with reporters, but couldn't tell them much.
It's at least $5 million. It probably is well in excess of $5 million, but I don't know.
17 firemen were injured in the blaze, but no one else. The loss could have been much greater. On a normal working day, there are up to 4,000 people in the building. Keith Bogue, CBC News, Montreal.
And there was another spectacular fire when a butane gas pipeline burst open near Sarnia, Ontario. Flames shot high in the air when the pipeline near the St. Clair River was ruptured by heavy equipment. The rest of the pipeline was quickly shut off, and the fire is now under control. 4 people were taken to hospital. Several dozen more had to leave their homes. The government of Quebec has ordered a coroner's inquest into the death of a man in Pointe-au-Pitre on Saturday. He died shortly after being arrested at a demonstration at a luxury resort. The resort's owner is involved in a bitter dispute with workers who've been laid off, and the union is accusing the police of killing the demonstrator. Paul Workman reports.
Union members today were cutting out black scarves, preparing for a funeral they hope will be an outpouring of labor anger. This photo shows 4 Quebec provincial policemen arresting 38-year-old Gaston Harvey during a demonstration Saturday night. A few minutes later, he choked to death on his own vomit. What happened is a matter of speculation and a lot of serious accusations. Ray Alcimar said Harvey was pushed and hit by the police. He also said he believed some of the policemen involved had been drinking, but Harvey did not provoke them.
Violent from the police side. We are not violent people.
The union not only accused the police of killing the man, but of trying to cover up exactly what happened by having an autopsy performed almost immediately after the man died and without any witnesses present.
Police never permit to anybody, even the family, to go and assist to the autopsy like do not permit.
Police say the autopsy showed that Gaston Harvey himself had been drinking, and there were no marks of violence on his body. This is what the dispute is all about, one of Quebec's grandest hotels, the Manoir Richelieu. It was built in the 1920s to serve rich American and Canadian tourists. Eventually, it was bought by the Quebec government rather than see it close. Then last year, the government sold it to a Quebec hotelier who refused to accept the union in the deal and immediately cut wages and jobs.
You're trying to break the union?
No, I don't detest the union. It's because I have 8 hotels and I have the union each hotel.
Malenfant bought the hotel for a fraction of what it's worth, but with a promise that he spend $12 million restoring it. The result of that deal is a rough and dirty fight between the hotel and its former employees. 2 weeks ago, union members broke into the hotel and ransacked the place, causing between $15,000 and $20,000 damage. This stately resort once stood as a symbol of luxury and privilege. Today, 6 months of violence and confrontation and now a death have turned it into a symbol of union solidarity in Quebec. Paul Workman, CBC News, Pointe-au-Pitre, Quebec.
Coming up on The Journal.
Dennis Goldberg, the man who dared to arm South African blacks, freed after 22 years in prison.
In a rich country that exports food when people are starving, that can do heart transplants and children die for lack of medical care. That's violence in the daily lives of people, and it's going to be put an end to no matter what it costs.
Dennis Goldberg, coming up on The Journal.
So much.
Canada today complained at the world's main trade forum about actions by the United States. We're protesting a new American surcharge on all imports that will cost our exporters an extra $200 million next year. The Americans say the new fee is to help them pay for customs processing. But Canada has told the Council of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade that the surcharge is unfair. Prime Minister Mulroney has warned Americans their new 15% duty on Canadian lumber will cost them money. The Prime Minister also called the decision pernicious. He blamed it on the atmosphere created by next month's congressional elections. Mulroney said Americans should be telling their politicians that opening up freer trade with Canada would be good for both countries. The public broadcasting system taped an interview with Mulroney during his New York visit last Friday. PBS broadcast that interview tonight. Another American has been charged with spying for the Soviet Union. Alan John Davies, a former member of the U.S. Air Force, is accused of trying to pass on military secrets to the Soviets. But his contact turned out to be an FBI agent, and tonight Davies is behind bars. Federal agents swarmed over Davies' home looking for more evidence. It's alleged he contacted the Soviet consulate in San Francisco and offered to turn over secrets about military reconnaissance cameras. Prosecutors said Davies wanted revenge on the Air Force.
Davies, who was in the Air Force and who was discharged for inadequate job performance, thought he'd been dealt badly by the Air Force and he wanted to get back.
Davies faces a possible life sentence if convicted. Britain asked the other members of the European Economic Community today to follow its lead and take action against Syria. Britain cut all diplomatic ties with Syria on Friday. It alleges that Syria was involved in an attempt to blow up an Israeli passenger jet. The British Foreign Secretary took all the evidence supporting Syria's involvement to an EEC meeting in Luxembourg. But all he got was a policy statement of outrage from 11 members.
The effective actions on which we've been able to reach agreement today fall significantly short of those which we should have liked to see.
The other EEC members said they want to hear what Syria says about the evidence before they meet again in 2 weeks to discuss taking stronger action. The world of British politics is still recovering from yesterday's shocking resignation of Geoffrey Archer, one of Margaret Thatcher's key advisors. Archer tried to pay a prostitute to leave the country after she called him to threaten a scandal. Archer says he never even met the woman before the call, but still he agreed to pay her to keep her quiet. Today, Scotland Yard said it was investigating the matter. The investigation may include looking into the role of a newspaper that photographed Archer paying off the prostitute. The London Stock Exchange has been planning for this day for years. They nicknamed it the Big Bang. To outsiders, it hardly seems in the same league as the beginning of the universe. But to the wheeler-dealers of the financial community, it's truly the start of a brave new world, a world of fewer rules and much newer technology. Sheila McVicker reports.
It wasn't exactly a big bang, but a start nonetheless. The opening of trading on London Stock Exchange was the death of a system where stocks were traded face-to-face on the exchange floor. Instead, this morning, the advent of computer trading, where brokers and offices anywhere in the world could arrange to buy and sell, by computer, any stock in London. The new system makes the existence of the stock exchange floor almost redundant, except when the computer doesn't work. And within half an hour of the start of trading, the computer was out of commission. A systems overload, said the stock exchange, too many people wanting to take a look. But first-day glitches weren't dampening the enthusiasm of the exchange chairman.
It is now a totally competitive market, and everybody can deal with everybody else.
And even though nearly every question he was asked concerned the computer failure, Sir Nicholas Goodison defended the system.
It's terribly British to always look for the faults in something and never look for the good things. I actually think that George Hayter and his team deserve a tremendous bit of congratulation for getting this system in only 2.5 years.
The introduction of all this new technology to London's traditionally more sedate markets may mean that some firms won't survive, and that as business practices change and become more aggressive, a whole way of polite living may disappear.
Oh, yes, it's going to be a bloody fight. Yes, very much so. I think we've got a bit of history in the making here.
The new rules have also deregulated the amount of money a broker will make on an individual transaction. And as people work harder for what could be more money, gone will be elegant lunches. There's more competition in the marketplace, too.
This is opening itself up to a lot more foreign competition, which has never been the case before.
Big international firms have been permitted to move in, and Canadian banks like the Royal, who aren't allowed to trade in stocks at home, have bought brokerage houses, wanting a slice of around-the-world 24-hour trading.
Now we can service our clients either in Tokyo or London or New York and keep in touch or closely to the American competitors.
And brokers in London are hoping that new technology and new rules will be enough to restore this city to its former financial prominence, hoping, too, that their firms survive all that competition. Sheila McVicker, CBC News, London.
The Red Cross, which was embroiled in a political controversy with South Africa over the weekend, has now made Israel angry. At its conference in Geneva, the Red Cross voted to make its new title the International Red Cross and Red Crescent Movement. The Red Crescent is used as a symbol in Muslim countries, but Israel uses neither a cross nor a crescent as a symbol. It uses the Star of David. It says it now feels excluded from an organization that's supposed to be a global humanitarian movement. 150 leaders of the world's major religions have had an unprecedented meeting with the Pope in the Italian town of Assisi. They met in the birthplace of St. Francis to pray together for peace. But as Mark Phillips of CBS News reports, Long after bells in the hillside town had called the faithful to prayer, shots were still ringing out in many of the world's trouble spots.
The Vatican called it the first ever such holy alliance for a common cause. 12 major religions, from Christianity to Shintoism to animism. 10 languages, from Hebrew to Urdu to Crow, all praying for the same ideal, peace.
Everybody believing in God wants peace. It's just the start. Today is just the start.
In all, the 160 delegates the Pope welcomed here represented 3.5 billion people. And to support his day of prayer for peace, the Pope had called for a day of real peace, a ceasefire in all current conflict. That didn't happen. In Northern Ireland, an IRA bomb derailed a freight train. In South Lebanon, a tense ceasefire between Palestinians and Shiite Muslims broke down. In Seoul, South Korea, students and police battled in the streets. The Pope acknowledged that it was sometimes religion itself that contributed to these conflicts. Religion, he said, must begin to practice the brotherhood it preached.
To peace or catastrophic war.
In making his call for a worldwide truce today, the Pope acknowledged it was more a symbolic gesture than a real possibility. The Pope's truce was observed in El Salvador, Nicaragua, and the Philippines, but the hopes of the day were tempered by realism.
None of us have the illusion that it can stop war, but what it can do is to try to heal some of the misunderstandings that are root causes of war.
It was a day of prayers and symbols of peace, when religious leaders could set aside their differences in the hope that their followers would one day do the same. Mark Phillips, CBS News, Assisi.
And that's the National for Monday, October 27th. For CBC News, I'm Knowlton Nash. We'll have regional news later. Now, the Journal.
Sex, sin, and scandal as only the British know how to do it. A top Tory advisor and a prostitute. Happy birthday, Canada Savings Bonds. Looking back 40 years after they first went on sale. And on the diary, doing it like a pro. Superstar Wayne Gretzky goes video with helpful hockey hints. The Journal with Barbara Frum and Paul Griffin.
Another sex scandal has grabbed the British headlines. Jeffrey Archer, key image advisor to Margaret Thatcher, and also a best-selling novelist, has resigned his position. He was caught trying to bribe a prostitute to get her out of the country. Archer denied ever meeting the woman, while saying she had phoned him repeatedly, threatening to go public with an untrue story about a non-existent affair.
So Archer paid the prostitute $4,000 to go away. At the payoff, the prostitute was wired with a tape recorder, and a newspaper reporter got pictures of the whole transaction. The scandal that forced Jeffrey Archer's resignation is just the latest chapter in the up-and-down career of Margaret Thatcher's bold young image maker. Once the youngest member of the House of Commons, Archer had already made and lost a fortune before writing a series of novels that sold 25 million copies worldwide and made him a multi-millionaire. When Margaret Thatcher named him deputy chairman of the Conservative Party last year, she was looking for a young, outspoken personality to take her message to an increasingly turned-off Britain. And outspoken is what she got.
But I am sick and tired of those people who begin to belittle her and tear her down. Yeah. It is boring, it is cynical, and it is thoroughly reprehensible.
But that kind of thunder has its drawbacks. Badly timed statements on sensitive issues angered fellow conservatives. Throughout 1986, there were rumors that Thatcher's right-hand man might be dumped. But in the end, it was not verbal indiscretion, but dubious dealings with a prostitute that unseated Britain's fastest rising conservative.
We are joined from London by Edward Pierce, the political editor of the Sunday Telegraph. Mr. Pierce, I assume you've been around Fleet Street for a while. What do you make of all this?
Well, it's not exactly good news for the Conservative Party. It isn't desperately important. It's a trivial and slightly absurd offence, but it's sleaze. And no group of people running up to an election in the next 18 months want any sort of sleaze. The other thing is that it's slightly ridiculous. We had somebody in England once, Lord Chesterfield, who said that of sex, the price is exorbitant, the pleasure transient, and the position ridiculous. And politicians who are caught like this end up being more mocked than either envied or hated.
Now, Archer has insisted that he never met this girl. Why would an astute man like that pay her $4,000 Canadian to get out of the way?
Well, there's a good deal of the Boys on Paper adventure special thriller kit about Archer. And what has happened could perfectly well be compatible with never having had acquaintance with the lady, but as part of some odd, childish game of subterfuge. It's not for any of us to judge, not with the English law of libel being what it is. We would know better than to do that. But it's a sort of damn silly thing. Going to Waterloo Station, or sending somebody there, meeting someone under the clock on platform 3, giving them money in a sealed envelope. It's all very puerile, I think is the word we're looking for.
But I presume that the News of the World rivals aren't going to stop until they can draw an absolute connection between Archer and this girl. I mean, hasn't he risked a lot? And isn't that what's going to be damaging if he's proved to be lying now?
Well, there are all sorts of rumors flying around Fleet Street tonight, and one must be fairly careful what one says. But certainly it's been alleged that they have reams of recorded tape, and that his telephone has been taped. What that reveals and whether it will do him harm and the circulation of the News of the World good, which after all is the prime objective of all this, who shall say? Certainly not me trying to keep on the right side of the English law of libel.
I want to hear what you think about the behavior of News of the World.
Fairly scabrous and disgraceful, but this is not exactly the big surprise of the month. They exist to behave disgracefully, and they're very good at it. The irony, of course, is that this is a news group which is on excellent political terms with the government, on violently bad terms with the opposition, which doesn't even allow it to go to its conference because of the mass dismissal of print workers by Mr. Murdoch, who owns News International. And they've been very buddy-buddy with the Tory party. And another rumor that has gone around is that this story, having been peddled all around Fleet Street, was sat upon by Mr. Murdoch. Again, this is alleged, quotes, unquotes, and only released late in the day because of pressures from other newspapers. Again, we don't know precisely what, but the Maxwell Press was certainly supposed to be have been offered it. The Mail on Sunday was certainly supposed to have been offered it. And this is a part of the sort of sleazy nature of British politics. I don't know whether your politics are any nicer, that you get a dirty story like this and it's peddled like dead rabbit around the newspapers until they get a buyer or until it sinks and you can have it for free.
Has Mr. Archer gone to ground for the last time? Not many people are ruined twice by the age of 46.
Well,
Can he do it a third time?
It's a classic example among English politicians that they have this difficulty about taking perfect control of their trousers. Mr. Archer may be, of course, totally blameless, but certainly his career, I think, is over in terms of politics. It was never a very serious political career. He was in there for 4 years, 70-74, left with a financial tribulation, connected with Aquablast in Canada, ironically enough, and then picked himself up again. But he was never taken terribly serious. He was a slightly comic buffoon figure in British politics, whom Norman Tebbit, the chairman of the Tory party, managed to hang a deep 4-ply shroud over, sent him on the Mum Supper Club circuit to prevent him from making the gaffe which he made early on. Now he's made a gaffe to keep the Mum Supper Clubs happy for 20 years.
It's so good of you to talk to us tonight.
My pleasure.
Just like the stereotypical Canadian, Canada's savings bonds are considered safe and secure, if not that exciting, and they are the favorite investment of Canadians. The latest issue went on sale today. This Saturday is their 40th anniversary. So the government is selling the sensible savings bond not with high interest rates, but with nostalgia. Fred Langen reports.
Canadian guns being fired on a Canadian newsreel from the Second World War. Soldiers in Europe taking time from making war to make propaganda for the good guys. Action station! And the war was also fought at home by the sewing machine. These newsreels were made to raise both troops and money, victory bonds. The war cost $4 million a day, and ordinary Canadians raised $12.5 billion to help pay for it. Retired Senator Florence Bird was so fired with patriotism, she wrote radio plays about victory bonds.
I wrote, I guess they were kind of a corny series, but it was about Joe Victory Man. And Joe would come home and tell Mrs. Victory Man, you see, about who he had seen that day and who had bought a bond and why they'd bought the bond. It was really when the men came marching home, they were going to buy a home, and that would be the money they had saved, and they were going to win the war with the bond, or the kids were going to have a better education because they'd saved. It was the same sort of argument that we're making now.
$15 being banked into bonds. That $15 was a good week's pay at the start of the war, but the 40s brought prosperity to Canada, and the bond habit stuck. Canada's savings bonds were brought out the year after the war ended. And, as Montreal historian Graham DeCarry explains, this whole period was the first time many Canadians had a lot of spare cash.
You don't find, before the victory bonds of the Second World War, you don't find that many opportunities for Canadians to save in a planned way, ordinary Canadians, except by, putting a few pennies in the bank each week. The opportunities weren't there. The savings bond during the war, I guess, was the first opportunity for most families to put money away in a methodical manner.
For 40 years, really 45 if you count victory bonds, the federal government has been borrowing money from ordinary Canadians. First, it used the cash to buy guns for the war against Hitler, and the patriotic line still sold bonds well into the 1950s.
Yet everyone has something to save for.
And how about this, bond fans? Giselle Mackenzie in a singing promo for Canada Savings Bonds. This was for the 1950 campaign, before TV in Canada, so this was shown in movie houses. It was still lend money to your country, but post-war Canadian yuppies were also encouraged to save before they spent.
Save a little each day in a sensible way.
This kind of advertising might not sell now, but it worked back then. And by the way, the rate for the 1950 bond was 5%. Actually a better rate than today, if you count inflation.
You'll go to college if you will acknowledge a bond is a wonderful buy.
Since Canada, the government is using nostalgia to sell bonds this fall. It's a Canadian tradition. 1 out of 2 Canadians has owned a bond at some time or other. 1/3 of us own one now. There are $41.5 billion worth of bonds out there, still uncashed. This month, these bonds were being printed in Ottawa. They go on sale this week at the new rate of 7.75%. There are better investments, but none is safe. Savings bonds will never make you rich, but they beat the bank, just. Ottawa has sold a total of $131 billion worth of savings bonds. And after 40 years, security-conscious Canadians won't stop now. I'm Fred Langen for The Journal.
When we return, a feature interview with Dennis Goldberg, the man who spent 22 years in a South African prison for his fight against apartheid.
Feel the changing vision. Push hard enough to bend, not enough to break. A spirit burning cool, it's an easy give and take. It's a new attitude. Easy going cool. Easy going cool. It's a whole new attitude. Easy going cool. Easy going cool.
Sometimes you feel a little Mexican. And when you feel a little Mexican, try Chi-Chi's new Fiesta Sampler, a feast of Mexican favorites to share with family and friends. Appetizers, entrees, and desserts, all for a very tempting price. Chi-Chi's new Fiesta Sampler, when you feel a little Mexican.
comfort. Every mattress claims it, but only one has discovered its dynamics. Beauty Rest by Simmons. No other mattress has the Contour Flex system. Individually pocketed coils that work one at a time to support and conform to every part, every movement of your body. Simmons Beauty Rest. The dynamics of comfort for body and soul.
BBC Radio, then CBC Television. Outstanding broadcasting. Unforgettable moments. A special celebration Sunday.
Nelson Mandela is the name most frequently associated with the fight against apartheid in South Africa. But another man, Dennis Goldberg, spent 22 years in a South African jail for his role in that struggle. Dennis Goldberg had a good career, a wife, and 2 children when he was arrested in 1963. At first, Goldberg had confined his political activities to organizational work. But when the African National Congress changed its strategy, Goldberg's role also changed.
In the early 60s, a series of bombings destroyed various government installations and buildings in South Africa. This sabotage of property marked a new, violent stage in the African National Congress's struggle against apartheid. Dennis Goldberg, a civil engineer, had designed and built the bomb. In 1963, police raided this farmhouse in Rivonia, near Johannesburg, arresting Goldberg and several others. The police found stacks of documents, including Goldberg's designs for weapons and some of the bombs he had built. The Rivonia trial became a focus of South African protest and world attention. Its defendants included 2 of the ANC's most famous leaders, Nelson Mandela and Walter Sisulu. At the trial, they were accused numbers 1 and 2. Dennis Goldberg was number 3. In July 1964, while police controlled demonstrations outside the courthouse, 8 of the defendants were convicted of sabotage and other crimes. All were given life sentences. Dennis Goldberg received 4 to run concurrently. In early 1985, he alone accepted an offer of amnesty from the government of South Africa. He left for Israel almost immediately after release to visit the daughter he had not seen for 22 years.
Within weeks, Dennis Goldberg joined his wife in Britain and resumed his work for the African National Congress. In a special interview, Goldberg spoke to Barbara about his imprisonment and his hope for the future of South Africa.
I want to know how you got involved, or were you born involved?
I could have been born involved since my parents were involved. But with the risks that political involvement against apartheid obviously put you into, taking it in with your mother's milk is not enough. When I went to university in 1950, I had to work it out for myself. Did I have an intellectual commitment and understanding? It took me 4 years at university to decide that I could not stand aloof. I had to be involved. When I finished at university, in fact, just before my finals, I did get involved. I failed my finals because of it. I then had to rewrite them the next year. It was worth it. It became a very exciting and interesting life.
But as a young adult, you could have gone to England. You could have gone to America. You were an engineer. You were trained. You could have said, this isn't going to work out well. Let me get out of here. So few, especially in the white community, did what you did. It has to be explained.
I believe that if you see something wrong, you do something about it. You see an accident and nobody else around, you go to help. This wasn't an accident that we're talking about. This was something built into the nature of South African society. If you believe that it's wrong, I believe you must do something. But that's simply to repeat my position. I could have walked away. I could have buried the feeling that I'd walked away. In fact, I wanted to come to Canada. I wanted to study civil engineering at McGill University. Has a tremendous reputation for civil engineering. I stayed and I got involved in politics.
The steps you took in South Africa, my understanding is by the time you were arrested, you had left a terrible trail, that you weren't very good at being clandestine, but you sure were committed and you sure believed.
No, I disagree with this business of clandestinity. We were all amateurs. We were all learning the way. But we were not caught by the security police because of our amateurishness.
We were caught because they introduced the Sabotage Act, which provided for detention for the purpose of interrogation, and that meant torture, and people broke. That's how we were found.
You have emerged from prison after 22 years to quite a different world.
Sure.
Has it not moved a lot faster than all of you could have dreamed at that Rivonia trial? Are you shocked at how quickly? That sounds so presumptuous when I'm talking to somebody who served for 22 years. But as you know, so many people thought they wouldn't see this in their lifetime. It looks like we're going to see a change in your lifetime, doesn't it?
Oh, it's great. Just shows how right we were in the policies we adopted and the methods we adopted. I think we were right to introduce the armed struggle. We were not able to carry it on. We were the transition between that phase of peaceful activity and the armed struggle. That armed struggle is now central to the struggle to overthrow the apartheid regime.
And you still believe that? You went into prison believing that? You have come out still believing that?
We've been proved right. Look at the crisis the regime is in. It can't do it on its own. Armed struggle alone. It requires mass political activity. We've seen that in the streets day after day after day. Over 20,000 people arrested since June 12th this year. Because they're out, they're working, they're active. And underground political activity. We only see those when they get caught and they appear on trial. And also the whole growth of a new trade union movement. Yes, those things are important. But the armed struggle was central, and still is.
Did you feel, when you met your old colleagues in Zambia, and some of them, I understand, said you made a mistake to accept release and thought that you should stay the martyr that they needed you still to be? How did you react to them?
In Zambia, in Lusaka, I was asked to explain what I'd done and why. And quite simply, I'd been in prison 22 years. I had the need to be active, no longer a passive symbol, and I knew I was treated as a symbol. Not of the caliber of Nelson Mandela, obviously not. But that's how it was. The need to be active, to participate in that struggle. And also, there was a sense of a life being wasted.
There was.
Sitting there, my whole life I was active, involved, doing things, wasted in the sense of not being active. Just sitting there, I don't regret a day of that time in prison. I mean that seriously. Not a day. I think I grew in prison as a person, as a human being, of being able to sense emotions, my own emotions, but also others.
I want to know how your family feels about you. Because when you made a choice for yourself, you chose their futures as well. You chose the next 22 years of your wife's life and of your son and daughter's life. Do you have 2 children?
I have 2 children. How do they feel about it? Well, my wife and I are together. I don't know if it's a small miracle or a big miracle. But for us, it's great. Not only do I love her, there were times in prison when I doubted if we could rebuild a relationship. We have done. But I like her a lot more than I ever did as a young man. It was difficult for her. She had to bring up 2 children on her own, make a living, which she did, and successfully. Our kids are nice people. Our daughter's nearly 32, our son nearly 29. He's going to make us grandparents in December. Life's great, it's rich. It was hard for them, but they were never ashamed of us. My son needed me to say that I hadn't deserted them, that I'd made another choice. My daughters and daddies are always difficult. And we didn't have the chance to establish a relationship on the basis of a child who's broken away from the parent and come back again on a different basis. We're still in the process of doing that. It's fascinating to feel it happening.
Why did your wife stay faithful to you?
Why? Well, she would say she loves me. I'm not sure that she was all the years, but that's not the important thing. The important thing is that when I came out, we were able to get together, to talk about whatever difficulties we had between ourselves, overcome the problems of the physical debility that prison causes, certainly in men, I don't know about women, overcome them together and re-establish a very fine relationship. Why did she stay there? I don't know. She did. I think she's crazy. I offered her a divorce. I said, oh, do you want to build a permanent relationship? I said to her, you must do it. Not because I don't love you, but because I could die in prison. I could be there forever. You could have a very lonely old age. So if you want a relationship, you must have it and live a fulfilled life. That's the rational part of it, the intellectual part of it. It wasn't so easy to cope with. But I have. You've got to. You can't be selfish. You can't be a pig about these things.
Have you liked what you've seen in the evolution of black consciousness in South Africa? Are you more fearful now of the future than your bold dream in the 50s and in the 60s?
Oh, no. I'm more confident we're going to build a new society. I have a dream. Can I tell you my dream? I'm in my 50s. By the time I'm 80, there'll be a conference somewhere in South Africa, 25 years on from now. And people will say, how have we done in building our new society? And I'll say, we've brought up a whole generation free of apartheid. New schools, new attitudes, even new teachers coming out of the colleges free of apartheid. Our economy has been redesigned to serve everybody. Doctors, nurses, in the rural areas. Land has been redistributed. People are not lying idle. We've made a very good start. We haven't wiped out the past yet. 25 years further on, they'll say to me at a conference, well, how do you think we've done? And then I'll say, I think we've done it. But why was it necessary to go through all that fighting? Why could the oppressors not see how obvious it was that people can live together? You know what's wrong about my dream? I won't live to be 105. The rest of it's true. It's going to happen. But painfully, slowly, trying to eradicate the scars. Don't blame the oppressed. The violence comes from the oppressors, day after day, in infantile mortality, in a life expectancy of 40 years, in a rich country that exports food when people are starving, that can do heart transplants and children die for lack of medical care. That's violence in the daily lives of people, and it's going to be put an end to no matter what it costs.
Interesting to meet you. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
The Journal returns right after this.
Been waiting long?
Just a couple of minutes. What did you think of that investment proposal?
I think we should go with these people. I like their attitude, and we're bound to do better than leaving our money in savings.
And the broker?
He seems really competent, easy to talk to, and what I liked most, he took the time to explain things. I'd say he's first rate.
I'm not surprised.
What do you mean?
You never would settle for second best.
Richardson Greenshields, investment advisors to Canadian Enterprise and enterprising Canadians.
Yahoo! Grab your mug and hug.
Come home for more during the Great Canadian Home Improvement Sale for great savings. Save on the Black & Decker Auto Shut-Off Iron with new Self-Clean 2. The Funker Silex 12-cup beverage brewer with 24-hour digital clock is value priced, and Sunbeam's 12-speed Mixmaster with Euro design is just $83.99.
Home hardware, home of the handyman.
The Journal Diary for October 27th. In the 1970s and early 80s, Argentina was ruled by a brutal military regime. Political opponents were kidnapped, never to be seen again. Now, scientists are helping mothers and grandmothers find the living children of the disappeared. Thousands of men, women, and children were kidnapped. Hundreds of the women were pregnant. The thought that grandchildren may have been born in prison and survived drove the grandmothers to find a way of proving their grandpaternity. They found that genetic scientists knew that a part of the body's defense, called HLA, acts as an identification code, as accurate as a fingerprint. A child's HLA pattern is made up of a combination from parents and grandparents. Even if the parents are dead, the evidence is there in the cells of surviving relatives. In 1983, democracy was restored to Argentina, and a public inquiry into the disappeared was launched. Unmarked graves were unearthed. Forensic experts were able to do more than provide identities for skeletons. They were able to establish that some of the remains were of women who had given birth in prison. Dr. Clyde Snow headed up the investigating team.
We start out looking at death, but we're finding life. It's a very bittersweet moment for everyone involved.
Many of the children were adopted by the military, those responsible for the death of the parents. The grandmother's persistence led to the establishment of a genetics bank. All genetic information from the grandparents will be stored in Buenos Aires in North America. American scientist Marie Claire King.
So if a child grows up, learns that he or she was kidnapped as an infant or born in captivity, they can find out then who they are by going then, finding out what their genotypes are, and we can match them with their grandparents who may by then be dead. But they'll know who their cousins are, and they know what their identity is.
The Blood of Our Children, a documentary report on the grandmothers of Argentina, will be shown on the Nature of Things this Wednesday evening on the CBC television network. Oilers superstar Wayne Gretzky has released his first video. Starring Wayne, brother Brent, and dad Walter, it's geared for budding young hockey stars with tips on dressing for the game, fancy footwork, and Gretzky's specialty, scoring goals, all done in a folksy, down-home style.
You've got to be proud to be an Edmonton Oiler. You've got to be proud to play in the NHL. You've got to be proud to be alive and be part of your family.
And finally, an explanation for that sweater tucked in on one side. Gretzky is superstitious. The video will be available for rental this week in video stores across the country or for purchase at $39.95. 1987 could be the year that compact disc sales overtake the vinyl record market. Motown Records must have seen the writing on the wall. Motown Records made its name in the 60s selling black artists to white middle-class teenagers. Their talent roster includes singers like The Supremes, Martha and the Vandellas, Smokey Robinson, and Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell. Now, Motown has become the first label to announce it will stop reissuing some of its earliest albums on vinyl. Instead, 200 titles will be available only on cassette and compact disc. David Farrell is editor of The Record magazine.
Compact disc sales are accelerating, and cassette sales are larger than album sales. So, over the long run, it's a smart move.
Record collectors know that when supplies dry up, prices skyrocket, but Martin Koppel, owner of Kopp's Collectibles in Toronto, thinks it's too soon to worry.
I think it will mean that if you're looking for a certain specific track by Stevie Wonder or a Marvin Gaye or a Miracles, then those are going to be hard to find, and it's an opportunity to get them while they're still around. But if you're just looking for those particular artists, the greatest hits, then it's not really a panic situation.
New material from Lionel Richie and other current Motown stars will still be released on vinyl. To date, none of the major labels have indicated that they will follow Motown's lead this year, but among record industry spokesmen, the word is that vinyl is on its way out. The Musée du Québec in Quebec City has scored a coup by becoming the only Canadian stop for a major exhibition on loan from the Soviet Union. 40 works by Picasso, Gauguin, Van Gogh, Monet, Renoir, and Matisse. Painted between 1906 and 1910, the paintings were seized from private collections by the Soviet government after the Russian Revolution. The exhibition runs until November 23rd. In London, Ontario, the Regional Art Gallery spent 5 years and $200,000 to mount an exhibition by Canadian artist Paul Peel. It's the first major retrospective of the 19th century artist, and it will move to Toronto's Royal Ontario Museum November 15th. The show will visit Montreal, Winnipeg, and Vancouver next year. A bank in a small Illinois town is giving a real bang for its investment bucks these days. The First Bank and Trust of Harrisburg, Illinois is offering semi-automatic guns in lieu of interest on certificates of deposit. For a one-year investment of $17,525 US, a customer will receive 2 Smith & Wesson collector model weapons in a handmade wooden case.
We view it as good for the collector in the appreciation, and good for the collector in getting all of his premium interest up front.
The gun promotion was devised to lure money from outside the local Harrisburg area. Unemployment in the county is at 16%. Deposits are pouring in from all 50 states, but the offer applies only in the U.S. And that's the Journal Diary.
Tomorrow on midday on most of these stations, Kitty Kelly's story, her unauthorized biography of Frank Sinatra. And here's a look at a story you'll see in the days to come on the Journal.
I'm Tom Alderman. Unlike in the U.S., college football is no big deal in this country, except perhaps here, a small college football field set deep in the Quebec countryside. This may be hockey country, but football is the game of choice at Bishop's University, mainly because it is a game here, not a matter of life and death.
I think you have to have control. I'm not sure. Do we have control of that, Dennis?
That's the way Bishop's coach, Bruce Coulter, has always played it. And after 25 years of playing for fun instead of win at any cost, it has made him the most successful coach at any level of Canadian football. That story soon on the Journal.
It's Monday, October 27th. Please stay tuned now for regional news, weather, and sports. I'm Paul Griffin.
I'm Barbara Brown. Good night.